Okay. So welcome everyone to our meetup focused on an Angular signals mental model. Today we're honored to have Enea Jahollari, a Google developer expert for Angular, as our speaker. Enea expertise will guide us through the Angular signals mental model, offering a deep dive into the innovative approach to managing a state in Angular applications. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you find today's meetup both informative and inspiring. So you can start.
So I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah.
I believe you can see.
Yeah.
Okay. So hello everyone. I'm Enea Jahollari. I'm a GD for Angular. I'm a software engineer working at Pushpaste. And today I'm going to talk about Angular Signals mental model. So let's start. So today's topics are Angular change detection with Zone.js, so how Angular works today. What are signals? How do they work? And then the last part will be the mental model of Angular change detection with signals. So, have you ever wondered how does this work? Having a count, clicking a button, and having the DOM updated. How does Angular work? Let's find out. So we know that Angular has a library that is called Zone.js that makes a lot of work under the hood and makes our workflow feel like magic. What Zone.js does is it monkey patches almost all the browser APIs in order to get notified when an event happens on the browser. So if we think of the browser as just a box with nothing on it, we just have some native APIs. But if we have Zone.js in our code, then basically what it will do is it will wrap the browser and have these patched APIs, let's say, working for it. Zone.js patches all these kinds of APIs like add event listener, on prop, set timeout, set interval, XML HTTP request, promises, alert, prompt, confirm, and on the slides you have a full list. I'll share the slides link later. So the browser, the moment that it has RxJS is like, good. Sorry, Zone.js is like, good, I'm listening now. Because probably most of us are Angular developers here. If we think of the browser as a component, we can think of Zone.js being like an event handler. So every time the browser has some events that are happening, they notify Zone about it, and Zone handles everything else. So in order to understand this better, let's create a custom zone. First, we import Zone.js. Then what we do is Zone.js will publish a zone in the window, and then we can just read it directly, and we can say zone.current.fork, and then give it a name, like my zone. So here we are creating a custom zone that we can use. And then here what we can also do is we can, let's say, override the onInvokeTask method. And inside the onInvokeTask, what we can do is we can just, let's say, call invoke task on delegate, and it will give us the result of that event. But before returning it, what we can do is we can run some side effects. And if an event is registered inside the zone that we are creating, every time that it emits, it will trigger this function. But how can we register an event inside our custom zone? Well, in order to do that, we just call my zone that we created and call .run. And inside that, we register the event listener. And now we will have a click listener that's registered inside the zone. And that means that every time we click, the onInvoke task now will be called. To understand this better, let's work with a count component. So let's say we have this Angular component. So we have count, and the button that calls increment, and the increment just increases the count. Well, this is what Angular generates under the hood. So we have the compiler generated code here. The first part, so we have if rf and 1, we have the creation phase of our component, and then we have our update phase of our component. So as we can see, we have for our div, we have an element start that creates a div, then we have the element end that ends it, and then on the middle we have text. Then for the click, we have Angular creates a listener for click, and then of course this will call the context.increment. Then we have our count here, that is an interpolation. So on creation phase, what Angular does is just, let's say, stores some index where this count is stored, and then on update phase, it interpolates it. Basically just, let's say, updating the value on the DOM with the new count. To better understand this, let's write it with just JavaScript. So we have the creation phase, basically document.create element, div, and button. Then on the bottom, we just give it a +1 as text content. Then we create some state, in our case, just count 0. Then we create a click handler function, basically just updating the count that we created and console logging the value. Then we create the update phase. So every time we want to update the DOM, we have this update phase. And what this does is just says div.text content is just count on the count value, the current count value. Then we add these elements to the body. And then we just call update phase once by default in order for the initial state to be rendered on the DOM. And of course, we need to register the event listener for our button. Well, show time to see it. So what can we see here is that our count on the DOM doesn't update. But console log gets called. That means state is updating, but the DOM is not being updated. And why is that? Is because Zone.js for Angular, in our case, isn't there. Or for our custom, let's say, code isn't there. Because no one is calling update phase after button click happens. So there's no update phase after a button click. Well, let's use our custom zone to make it work. So what are we going to do is we are going to remove our button add event listener from here. And then we will introduce the zone that we created before. And then we will have update phase being run every time that we have an event that is being run, or let's say that is running. And then instead of registering the event listener outside the zone, now we are going to register it inside our zone that we created. And that means now that every time we click or have some other event listeners that we register inside our zone, update phase will be called. So let's see this in action again. Basically, what we have now is a working application. DOM updates correctly, and console log gets called correctly too. Well, what are signals? Because Zone.js will learn more about it. Well, signals is a system that granularly tracks how and where your state is used throughout the application, allowing the framework to optimize rendering updates. So I have a demo here. That we're going to look now. So we have an Angular application, site main. A console. So in order to create a signal, what we do is we say signal 0. And then in order to read it, we just call it. And as we can see, we have a count 0 here. Of course, what else we can do is we say count set at 1. And then we console log it again. Let's refresh. Everything's fine. Then we can also update a signal using that update. And then let's console log again. As we can see, everything works fine. We can also have computed in order to derive signals and state. So we have double count here. And of course, we can also run side effects when these signals change. And that's one of the core parts of signals. So let's comment this out. And let's go on here. So let's say we have signal A and signal B, and we want to, let's say, console log every time one of those changes. And that's where effects come to help. So we have an effect, and inside of it, we have a console log that will run every time the signal A or signal B changes. So by default, effect will run at least once because we have signals with initial values 0 and 2. Then let's say we have a set timeout for 1 second that sets it also A to 1. So it changes and console log runs again. The same thing, let's say as we change again, changes. So as we can see with signals, we can listen to signal changes using effects. And of course, running side effects based on that. Okay, but how does this help us? Let's go back to our, let's say, zone component that we had before. So we have this creation phase component. Let's run this one. So we have our count 0, as we had before, that everything works. So we have create state, button click, update phase. And then we have this my zone current that runs the update phase every time we click on a button. So everything works perfectly fine. And how would signals, let's say, fit into this is by using signals, we can get completely rid of zone. And how we can do that is, for example, in our main, by default, we have imported zone. So we remove that import in order to make Angular work. Currently, we need to use this ng zone loop zone. And then when we have our main compiled zone, what we can do is let's import it, but not use it using this one. What we can do is we can get completely rid of this by running the update phase inside an effect. What does that mean? Let's say our state is not 0, but is a signal of 0. Instead of increasing the count like this, let's use that update. So we are using signals now. And here, instead of just saying count, we need to call it. So this thing gets called. Then we run update phase 1 by default. But what we can do is we can just comment this out for the moment. And then we need to register this event listener, just like before. We can comment out the whole zone. And because now we are using signals, we can use also effects. Because we use effects, what we can say is, please run the update phase every time a signal inside of it changes. So because also effect runs at least once, as we saw before, this means that now if we click on +1, it will call the button click. Button click will update the signal will trigger the effect, and the effect will run the update phase. And the update phase will, of course, trigger the dump to be updated. So as we can see, our dump gets updated correctly. We need to copy. And of course, our console log works fine too. So what does this mean is currently in Angular, we have, for example, zone components. As we can see, zone count. And let's use this in order to have a more clear idea. So we have our zone component that works same. We need to comment this out. So we work directly with. So as we can see, our count increases correctly. And if we look at our signal component, let me comment this out, we'll see a little bit later. We have our count 0, and then on increment, we just incremented. So if we go on our main, we also import the signal component. As we can see, it updates the same way. But how does, let's say, signals work here is on a zoneless application, like on a future zoneless, and in order to trigger it, we can use this provide zoneless change detection. What we can do is we can see that if we update this count, it updates correctly. But if we have inside the zone component something like set timeout, and then also let's make let's remove zone from here. Let's say we have zone that increases correctly, but when we click on it, look what we do here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now, yes. Yes.
Is the screen shared?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. So let me get back again. So what can we see here is that the moment that we have some increment and then we have this set timeout, that we increase the count, let's say after 2 seconds, like if we click, we can see that the console log here, the count updates. But as we can see here, the DOM is not updated, and this is Angular without zone. And in order for this to work, what we can also do is, for example, we can increase or we can trigger this, let's say, change detection from the count here. But even if we clicked here, we see that the zone count here updated. But in order to make this more clear, what we can do is let's enable change detection here. So on push change detection. So we increase this, and we see that the count here updates again. But now if we try to increase the zone, as we can see, the zone count didn't change. And the reason is because Angular doesn't know that this component is dirty. But with signals, that's different. If we go on the signal component, what we can see, let's do the same thing. We can see that even after the signal updated asynchronously, signals still update the DOM. So with signals, we can safely say that they are always going to be in sync with, let's say, what Angular produces in the DOM. And I think that's it when it comes to signals mental model. You have to think of the template as it's an effect. And every time the signals that you, let's say, read inside of the template get changed, Angular will make sure that the DOM gets updated. And I think that's it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I will.
So, any questions?
Yeah, we have a question. from subscribers that want to know about future of Zone.js and Angular. What do you think about it?
So as I see it, Zone.js is a crucial part of Angular, and it's going to be optional at some point, but I don't think it's going to be deprecated soon, because let's say all the Angular applications that they are using it. So making it, let's say deprecating it is not, I think, the right way to go. So Zone.js will be here, and of course will be, how can I say, easy to not use it. Like if you want to use zoneless, you can safely just use signals or also just observables, and it should be fine.
Okay. A second question is, what about NGRX state management system with the signals? What do you think about it?
So as I said, NGRX is already supporting signals either in NGRX store with select signal, but also with NGRX signals package. And I think it's a really good library. And if you want to go like complex state management mode, NGRX signals also is a good fit for that. The Redux pattern in general is a really good fit for complex state architectures, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay. Oh, it's all question. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. So I will end the stream. Okay.